In the next couple of videos, we're going to look at the basics of audio in Unity. And when you work with audio, there are two main parts. You're going to have an audio clip, and that's just your sound or your music file, and that could be, say, a wave or an MP3 or an OGG. And then you're going to have an audio source, and the audio source then plays that file, and it sets the volume and those kinds of things. So we'll take a look first at an audio clip. And when you drag a sound file into Unity, it'll show up in the project and you'll actually see a preview of it. And when you click in the inspector, you'll see a bunch of settings for that audio clip. So down at the bottom here, we have a preview. And we can press play to listen to the sound. And we can choose to loop it. So that allows us to preview what's going on. And up at the top, we're going to have a bunch of import settings. Now before we get to those, I think it's important for you to understand how audio works. And the way that we store audio is we store it as a series of samples. And each sample is just a number between 0 and 1. It's a float. And we might have, say, 40,000 samples per second. And so when you put all these together, it forms the rough outline of a wave. And that's really all sound is. Sound is waves. That's how we hear things. So when we store it on disk, we store it with all of these samples. And what you're seeing here is actually the waves formed by all of those samples. Now, audio comes in a couple different forms. You can have two channels of audio, two different waves, and that's just for the different ears. You have your left and your right ear. If you'd like, though, you can force to mono, and essentially what this will do is take the two and average it and create a single channel for sound. This saves you some space, and it also makes sense for sounds that are going to be 3D in your scene. So you can have sounds that are 2D, that essentially play in the player's head. They play directly through the headphones. And then you can have sounds that have a location in space. And for those 3D sounds, you're typically going to want them to be mono. Next up, we have a bunch of settings that relate to the compression of audio. And audio data, if we have 40,000 samples every second, and we have a 10-minute song, can get really big really fast. So typically what we're going to do is we're going to compress it down. And a lot of times, this works just fine, especially for things like wind through the trees or electronic sounds. There are things that compress really well, but sometimes it affects the quality of the audio. It's noticeably different. So Unity, in all of these settings here, and then kind of in these settings here, gives us control over how we manage the audio, how much we compress it. They're sort of quality settings. So let's take a look first at these top two. And these deal with how Unity loads audio. So by default, when you open up a scene, Unity is going to load all of the audio clips in that scene. Now, if you'd like, you can tell Unity, no, don't load it for me. I will load it when I want, and then I'll unload it later. So if we uncheck this, Unity won't manage it for us. It will allow us through scripts to have full control over loading and unloading the audio. If we do want to allow Unity to manage it, then when it first loads the scene, Unity is going to stop for a second, it's going to load all of the audio, and then it's going to continue. If you have very large audio, maybe this will introduce a lag into loading your scene. So what you can do is you can choose this load in background option. And this will essentially load your audio asynchronously. So Unity will continue, and the audio will be essentially on a separate thread. The upside is, of course, that you're not going to block Unity. Unity can keep going. The downside is maybe when you want to access this sound, it isn't ready. So there's a little bit more management you have to do there. These final three settings are per platform. So they're essentially quality settings, and maybe I want different quality settings for, if I'm running on a PC versus if I'm running on an older mobile phone, or if I'm delivering something over the internet. And these deal, again, with that compression. So the first one is how we want to load things. We can just load and play the audio compressed. We can try and decompress it when we load to try and essentially improve the quality. And then we can stream it directly from disk. And one thing to note with streaming directly from disk is this uses up some of your I/O. And your I/O is your communication between your computer and your disk when it's reading and writing things. You can only read and write so fast. And especially on mobile devices, you can only read and write so fast from their memory. And a lot of times mobile devices will only allow you to stream, say, one audio clip, and they'll require you to preload all of the others into memory. Next up, we have the compression format. And when we're compressing, we can choose what algorithm we want to use. So we have this PCM, and this is a mostly uncompressed. And then this 80 PCM, this is just a preset that's a fairly well compressed. You can actually see here how well it's compressing. And we also have this open source Vorbis. And Vorbis is part of the OGG definition. So OGG is a type of audio. And Vorbis allows us fine-grained control. So at the one end, you can see that we get really distorted audio, but a really small file size. And at the other end, we get pretty good audio and still somewhat compressed file size. And finally, we have this sample rate setting. And as I mentioned, you have a certain number of samples per second. That's how audio works. And you can see for any clip what the sample rate is. So 44.1 kilohertz, and hertz is just times per second, is kind of an industry standard. But we have control over that. We can allow Unity to try and optimize the sample rate, so allow it to try and figure out a better sample rate that will save us some memory. And we can also override. We can specifically say, I want the sample rate to be such and such. And this is, again, another way of compressing our audio. So we had a lot of these different parameters that we can set when we import our audio. And in the next video, we'll take a look at the audio sources, which is where we actually play the audio.